Hi, this is the Journal Star editorial board interview with George Dungan, who is the is a candidate for the District 26 legislative seat in the state of Nebraska. We are joined by editorial board members. George, thank you for being with us. I'll let Pat and Kent introduce themselves. Pat, you want to go first?
Sure. Hey, George, I'm Pat Sangemino. I am the nighttime news editor here at the Journal Star.
Nice to meet you.
You too.
And I'm Kent Walgamat, and I'm an arts and entertainment writer, and I've been on the editorial board for more than a decade, so I've done this a few times.
Nice to
All
meet
right. And Pat and Kent both, they help out with their share of editorial writing too, because I get tired. So, and anyway, I'm Dave, I'm the editor. George will launch into the questions. We have a standard set of 7 questions that we want to get to. The last one is sort of a catch-all. So if you get through the interview and feel like, hey, I didn't get to use my best line, there will be an opportunity to use your best line at the end.
Perfect. Yeah, I got them all written down here in front of me. So.
All right. And Pat and Kent may respond with follow-up questions to the standard questions if you say something that piques their interest. And Kent will probably say something regardless of whether it's a follow-up or not, because he's got his pet questions. So for starters, why do you want to be a public servant particularly right now? And what experiences and attributes qualify you to serve?
Sure. Yeah. No, first of all, thanks again for having me. I guess I haven't fully said that, so I'll just say thank you to all of you and the rest of the editorial board. I mean, that's a question that I think I get asked on a pretty regular basis when I'm knocking on doors and talking to folks, or why do you want to do this? And a lot of people similarly ask, especially now when things are so divisive and problematic. Try to give you the somewhat short answer so I don't ramble on for too long, but I really, really, really do believe in public service, and I believe it's something that we all have a calling to do. I'm sure I'll talk about this ad nauseum at other times, but I currently serve as a public defender here in Lancaster County, and so the idea of serving other people and trying to give back is something I very much believe in. As to the sort of why that's part of my DNA or makeup here, it goes back to my upbringing, I really think. I was born and raised here in Lincoln, and for the first 5 years of my life or so, I was raised by a single mother who worked really hard, but we did struggle at times to make ends meet. And so it really instilled in me that desire not only to work hard, but also to help other people, because I saw the helpers along the way who helped us. And that was something that I thought was incredibly important. So from a very young age, it really instilled in me the importance of helping other people in the need to try to make ends meet. That sort of inspired me to then go to law school, know that I was going to do some sort of public service law, and got into public defense. And I really think that those skill sets that I've picked up along the way, working in public defense, have made me uniquely equipped to go into the legislature and really help other people. One of those would be being a voice for others. I think as a public defender, a lot of what I do is storytelling. We do a lot of trying to make sure that people have their backgrounds told. People all come from somewhere, they're raised from somebody, they all have family. And a lot of what we end up doing is trying to convey to other people their stories. And so synthesizing information and being able to represent other people is something that I think I've had to do very well, and I do a lot in my current job, and it's something I'd like to do at the legislature, is taking that idea of telling people stories and doing it on a bigger level. Part of the reason that's important to me is a lot of what the legislature deals with are affecting real people. These aren't just numbers on a page, they're not just the debates that we see over and over again. And I think that I am, again, uniquely equipped, having done this for quite some time, to see the urgency of a lot of the issues that I think are important. And so I think having that skill set is also really helpful. And then finally, to kind of sum that up, I think, again, I have a particular skill that I've had to develop, which is bringing a number of people to the table and trying to come up with the best solution for everybody. I work with judges, prosecutors, clients, and other persons in my work, trying to reach a common conclusion or a common consensus. And so I think being able to talk across those proverbial aisles and work with people is something I do well. And so those are some of the skills I think that I would take to the legislature. And certainly the desire to help other people on that bigger scale, I think, is the incentive behind that.
Okay, thank you. So Governor Ricketts and the legislature have proposed measures about land use, not allowing permanent conservation easements, education. They've also, there's a bill about, the public health situation where Lincoln Lancaster has its own health district and can make its own rules, but the rest of the state can't. They want to take that. They want to take that away from Lincoln Lancaster and have a statewide control. So it's kind of an odd time for the issue of local control. What's your philosophy on local control, whether it's good across the board, selected issues? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And I think it's multifaceted, right? A lot of the issues that you've talked about are ones that I do disagree with the governor on. I think part of the reason that Lincoln, Lancaster County has been able to stay as healthy as it has been the fact that our city and our health board has taken the pandemic so seriously. And I think to remove that ability is going to be very problematic. Similarly, I think to try to dictate from the governor's office what schools can or can't teach is a big problem. I think a lot of the teachers I've talked to have big issues with it, and so do I. And teachers know what's best to teach in their classroom. So to try to take away that control the school board has and make it centralized under the governor is a problem. Similar to the conservation easements and a lot of those, I think it's important to allow people to do those things if they want to, because we have to try to conserve as much of our environment as we can. Generally speaking, I am for local control. I think there are some circumstances and some unique issues where it's important to make sure that we as a state protect our citizens. I think there are certain issues to make sure there's that safety net still there that we have to step up and say, no, we are as a state going to do these things for our citizens. But when that starts to infringe or impede on the local area's abilities to actually do what's best for their people, I think it becomes a problem, especially when it's predicated on a political agenda. And so I do definitely believe in local control, especially when it comes down to actually helping the citizens of those areas.
All right, well, I'm going to remind you, we've got about a little bit more than 20 minutes left. And I got a feeling the next question you could go out at length on. What are your priorities and what would be your plans to address our corrections crisis?
Yes, you're right. That could be its own conversation. So I'll do my best to keep it short. We do have a corrections crisis. I think that's obvious. I do not support building a new prison. I think we can't build our way out of this problem. That's been talked about ad nauseum. I think there needs to be criminal justice reform that is smart on crime instead of just tough on crime. But what's interesting about that, I think, is obviously it can include things like sentencing reform, getting rid of mandatory minimums, which disallow judges to have autonomy. But it can be bigger than that, right? I think it can be outside of the entire spectrum of what we normally think of as criminal justice reform. I say all the time to people, we got to stop fires from happening instead of trying to put them out on the back end. And one way that we can do that as it pertains to neighborhood safety and criminal justice issues, I think, is investing in mental health and substance abuse resources. Again, in my job on a daily basis, I see the incredibly negative effects that a lack of access to healthcare can have for people, including but not limited to being able to treat mental health problems and substance use issues. And so I think investing on the front end is going to be important, but then also trying to have reforms that ease the sentencing burdens that we're seeing, especially for these nonviolent drug offenses where people really do need treatment is going to be important. And you're right, I could talk for a lot longer about that, but I'll try to get on to the next few questions.
Well, if you got another good line on it, you can come back to it at the end too. Tax reform is a big issue. What would be your strategy? What do you see as the right way to reform tax cuts, or right way to reform taxes? If it includes cuts, where does the money come from?
Sure. One thing we obviously hear about all the time in Nebraska is property tax. When I'm out knocking doors, that's a lot of people's number one issue. I will agree, property taxes are incredibly high and probably should be reduced, but that can't happen at the detriment or to the detriment of other programs like schools. I know a big part of our property taxes go towards schools. And so one thing that I've talked to a lot of people about is trying to balance out sort of where that funding comes from. I think that if you're going to actually see property tax relief, it should be done, but it should be balanced out with then more state funding for schools. So that way you can reduce the property tax burden, but not necessarily have the schools be at the detriment of that. I did live in Kansas for a little while, went to undergrad down there, and I was there when the Brownback administration cut taxes to the point that schools literally couldn't open, and there were no books for kids and no teachers. So I've seen the problems with that. And so I do want to see property tax cuts, but I think that means the state needs to step up, and there should be a restructuring of the TIOSA formula to make sure that you can actually have state funding given how low we normally are on that. I'd also advocate generally for at least exploring the possibility of increasing taxes on some corporations, especially a lot of outside corporations that come here to benefit from Nebraska. They do a great job of bringing jobs, but when you see property tax owners paying more than their fair share, like people who buy houses and people who are just people in my neighborhood, it's definitely outweighed, I think, by the amount that corporations could be helping pay for that as well. And so trying to look into the possibility of increasing corporate tax rates is something I think we can look into. But I do think that taxes should be cut, but not at the detriment of people in schools.
All right, Kent, you're moving forward like you have a question. And you're muted, which makes asking questions hard.
Yes. Two things correlated. Would you be, what's your thought on increasing a sales tax base by, taxing some services and all the thing, a lot of the stuff that's been exempted, farm machinery or whatever. And second, and then tied in with the property thing, what's your thought on valuation of agricultural property and changing it from a sales-based thing to a production-based?
Sure. I mean, as to the first part, that's one thing that I've heard from a lot of people about as well. It's a thing that I feel pretty passionately about. I generally am opposed 100% to a consumption tax. I'm generally opposed to broadening a sales tax base. I think sales tax, more so than other taxes, is regressive. And I think that we need to make sure that when we actually are analyzing how to broaden the tax base and increase income as a state, we can't be doing it on the backs of everyday people who are working hard and already have trouble making ends meet. I think that reevaluating income tax brackets and reevaluating, kind of to the second point of your question there, how we value land, it all needs to be taken together in an effort to make sure that everyday working people aren't saddling the majority of the tax burden. When you look at broadening a sales tax base, especially getting rid of some of those exemptions, it does tend to, across the board, harm the most marginalized folks in our population who already have trouble getting a leg up. And so I think when you're examining either one of those two issues, you just have to make sure that you do it from a point of making sure that people are being supported rather than having to saddle something that's unfair to them. When it comes specifically to land valuation, obviously that doesn't affect LV26 quite as much here in Northeast Lincoln, but I do want to make sure that I'd be a senator for everybody. So that's the kind of issue where I'd be very open to hearing from folks about what they think would be best for them, making sure that we're broadening the tax base in a way that benefits the state, but doesn't harm individual people.
All right, thank you. Do you believe efforts to investigate the 2020 election in Nebraska are warranted? Do you support efforts to change the state's election law and procedures? And if so, how can those changes be made without suppressing or disenfranchising voters?
No, I don't think the election results from 2020 need to be explored. I think it's a waste of time and money. I understand that people are generally upset when they feel like their voices aren't heard, but I think it's misplaced to examine the way that the election actually went down. Numbers of independent commissions have found, obviously over the last 2 years now, that any claims that the election was stolen or that votes were fraudulently counted or cast are pretty much without merit. And I think that to continue to waste our time and money and resources on those is a problem. As a corollary to that, then obviously there's the state, the driver's license ID requirement for voting that's being circulated, that's being talked about. I am opposed to that because, kind of to the last point of your question, it harms people who are in marginalized populations who don't then have the ability to vote in quite the same way. I think we should be doing everything to avoid modern day poll taxes. I think our current election system is safe, it is secure. There's not been any major issues of any kind of elections being fraudulently won. And so I think to focus on that is somewhat of a red herring that a lot of people are focusing on too much when they should be focusing on issues that actually affect everyday people.
So are you opposed to showing a driver's license or any form of ID?
I think that, well, particularly a driver's license is problematic. I do think that any kind of ID would be somewhat more acceptable to some people, just given how that's easier to access. But at this point, I would oppose any requirement to show an ID for voting. Primarily because, again, in my job, I work with a very particularized population of folks who I've seen the struggles that they can have just to get any kind of ID at all. I think that sometimes we can be a little bit forgetful as a society of how difficult it can be to get back on your feet when you're experiencing issues, whether they're financial struggles or other mental health, substance abuse struggles. And those people shouldn't be prohibited from voting too, because their voice matters just as much. So I think that our current system that requires a signature and an address check is adequate. And until I saw some problems with that, I would say that no ID at all is necessary.
All right. So should the legislature scrap the concept of nonpartisanship? And if not, how do you make it be more nonpartisan than it is right now?
I think our nonpartisan legislature is incredible. I know a lot of people pontificate about that quite a bit, but I really do think it's important and it's unique. The fact that we have the nonpartisan legislature allows for folks to disagree about issues they otherwise might not have. And I think it lends a certain autonomy and ability to represent voters to each individual senator that they wouldn't have otherwise if they were being told what to do by a caucus whip or a majority leader, minority leader, or something like that. And so I think the individuality that our nonpartisan legislature permits is really important. I think to encourage that more, really, we just need to be working on cordiality. That sounds like just a line, but it's true. I think we've all seen in the last couple of weeks how rough things have gotten at times in the legislature, and I'm not blaming anybody for that in particular, but tensions are running high, emotions are running high, and I think it's very important to remember that we're talking about issues rather than personal attacks. And so if I were given the opportunity to go and serve my district, I would do everything I could to maintain those conversations, foster those conversations, and try to work with folks regardless of where they come from, because I think there's certain things that we can all agree on. I've had conversations with people from all ends of the political spectrum where we've actually agreed or disagreed, but ultimately being able to have the conversation is the important part, I think.
All right, well, we're ahead of schedule right now. So I'm going to check and see if there are some follow-up questions, and Kent has at least one.
Yeah, we won't be ahead for long.
Okay, just make sure he gets his closing monologue.
I will. I'm specifically interested in a couple your thoughts on a couple of these giant water proposals. The canal to come from Colorado, which I think is perhaps fraught with legal issues, to say the least, and then the big lake up on the Platte. What do you think about that? Would you support those, or looking into those, or do you think what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of as you indicated, both of those present a lot of larger issues. And I think part of I don't want to say problem with them being debated right now, but part of what we're seeing is I think that oftentimes issues like that aren't inherently a problem in and of themselves become something of a political football when they become about bigger issues. Personally, I'm not opposed to those projects being looked into. I don't think that right out the gate, they're an issue or a problem. But I do think that there are a lot of questions I have about various things that go into them. If we're going to do projects like that large lake in Gretna or the canal, I think it's really important to make sure that who's getting those contracts and where the funding comes from is something we can all see and talk about. I think it needs to not just be some way to help somebody's friends. I think the other big question is, are there currently issues here in Nebraska that could be helping people right now, again, with this urgency of what we're seeing in terms of food insecurity, housing insecurity, criminal justice issues? Are there places that money could be better spent in the immediate future that we're going to see a tangible result for our money that give people help? I don't think the lake is a problem inherently, but I think that if that money could be going elsewhere and helping people, I would like to at least explore what that would look like. Now, on the other hand, the lake project I know benefits a lot of people in the area, and I know it brings in jobs and it brings in business. If it is going to go forward, that's the kind of thing that I would want to make sure we also ensure that there's enough public land around there that everybody can enjoy it. I think when we're investing public dollars in large lands projects or water projects, it's definitely the kind of thing that I want to make sure is not just for those who can afford it. And so I think making sure there's accessibility is going to be very important. So when I read about them, they're certainly not on the top of the list of priorities for me. I think they present a whole host of interesting questions, which you've kind of gotten into. And I would just want to make sure there's transparency there and how they're being executed, and also that they're accessible to everybody. But if we're going to do it, I think we should do it right.
The other, I think, important thing about serving in the legislature that people don't, from the outside, don't largely recognize, that most of your work gets done on the committee level, really. Have you given some thought as to, if you got elected, what committees you'd want to be on and why?
Yeah, I think that having worked in and around the legislature, just in various ways that I've assisted in testifying or being involved, I've seen the importance of committees. Definitely have given that some thought. If I had to give you a top three, I think right now I'd probably put judiciary on the top, just because that's sort of where my niche background lends itself to be the most helpful. I think it's the one area that I actually have some experience in that I can bring to the table that is unique, that would be helpful. In addition to that, I also want to make sure the committees that I served on, if I got the opportunity to choose my own, would benefit LD 26. And so business and labor is another one that I would very much be interested in serving on. I think a lot of folks here in the district care a lot about business and labor practices. We have a lot of good, hardworking labor folks in the district, which I support. So being on business and labor would be very important too. And then also transportation, telecommunications. I think dealing with transportation issues affects everybody. And telecommunication issues, I think moving forward, are going to be some of the biggest issues that we're going to debate maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, talking about broadband expansion, making sure we do that in ways that help people. And so those are the three committees that I think I'd focus on. And genuinely, I think that no matter where I'd end up in committees, I would be excited to serve. And so I'm also happy to hop on somewhere that I'm not as experienced with, as long as I'd be given the opportunity to learn, because I think that's important too.
All right, well, we're down to the last question, which is, what have we not asked you that you wish we would have, or what did we not spend enough time talking about that you'd like to spend a little more time on?
Oh man, one area that I think we've not touched on really, it's kind of wrapped into a lot of what we've talked about already, though, with property taxes and taxes, would be education. One of my big points that I talk about with everybody that I possibly can is the importance of public education and making sure that public schools are supported. I'm a product of the Lincoln public school system. I think we have fantastic public schools all across Nebraska. And so making sure that we do what we can to not just support the current public schools, but to try to make them even better. Making sure teachers are supported, making sure they have the pay they need. It's really important to me, because I think that's really how you effectuate the most change and the most positive progress, is that you make sure that kids get the support they need. So allowing teachers to have freedom and support in the classroom to teach about important issues and making sure they're supported is huge. And then obviously making sure that public dollars go to public schools. That's one thing I absolutely believe in. I'm a big public school advocate, and I would do everything I could to protect public schools. So that's probably one area that I get into a lot with folks out in the neighborhoods when I'm knocking doors. But other than that, I think you all have touched a number of the other issues.
All right, well, Kent's got one more thing I can tell.
Forward there too.
So would you favor sort of revamping TIOSA to, in addition to increasing the money, to make it more, I don't know what the right word is, equitable, more something along the line of what Lynn Walls has proposed?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, I think that TIOSA needs to be re-examined. And I think that kind of goes back into, like I said, the state support, and then also making sure it's more equitable into where that money is coming from and who it's going to. I don't have a silver bullet solution right now. I wish I did, because that'd be a lot easier and probably a good selling point. But absolutely, I think it needs to be re-examined. And I think trying to find a way to make sure there's equitable distribution is going to be incredibly important.
All right. Well, with that, George, I think we are wrapped up. And we appreciate you spending 30 minutes with us on a Friday afternoon while the NCAA tournament is happening all around us. And I think we're off just in time to catch the Huskers.
Yes, I think we are too.
All right. I just got my alert from the sports department. So, George, again, thank you for joining us. Pat and Kent, it's always a pleasure. So,
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, George.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you letting me be here. This is fun for me. So it's good to talk to y'all.
All right. Thanks very much. We'll end it here and have a great weekend.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.